Chapter 754. As soon as he entered, his bulky figure quickly attracted the attention of many people. Director Shui Qing also saw Beta Persei at the first moment and hurriedly came over to greet him. This was the person beside the sixth young master, and he was also a popular person. He absolutely could not be offended. "Brother Beta Persei, why do you have time to inspect our small yamen?" Shui Qing walked over with a smile on her face. Originally, she wanted to call Beta Persei Master, just like how the people in Crimson City called Jianghu. However, after someone called Beta Persei that way, he was scolded. What a joke, the sixth young master was only a duke. How dare they call him master? For this matter, he personally sent a telegram to Jianghu in Crimson City, severely criticizing him. Jianghu was also somewhat wronged. He did not request to be called Master Jianghu, but the people below took the initiative to call him Master Yang. However, even with Beta Persei's angry reprimand, Jianghu also asked everyone in Crimson City to call him Jianghu in the future. If not, they could call him Brother Jianghu. Anyway, Master Jianghu was not allowed. Whoever called him that could only be punished. After seeing Shui Qing, Beta Persei also asked with a smile on his face with concern, "How is it? Is everything normal here? Did anyone come to make trouble?" Why would anyone come to make trouble? This is the beginning city. Are the patrols that can be seen casually on the streets useless? Shui Qing pursed her lips and chuckled. Beta Persei also chuckled. The safety of the beginning city had always been the most important. Even if it had begun to snow, the security and defense of the city was still the same as usual. Every 10 minutes or so, a patrol of at least 10 people would appear on the streets. Not only that, the streets in the city had always been very clean. Even if the heavy snow was still falling, the snow that had covered the ground a moment ago would be swept out in the next moment. This showed how frequent the patrols were. The beginning city was surrounded by grasslands and was surrounded by Mongolians. The slightest carelessness might cause unknown things to happen. In order to achieve a deterrent effect, the patrols on the streets were more frequent. By the way, how's the recruitment today? How many good seedlings are there? Beta Persei didn't dwell on the issue of public security. Instead, he asked about the recruitment of the publicity department. Shui Qing knew that this was probably the sixth young master's intention. He wanted to find out more about them, so she answered truthfully, "The situation isn't too good. Although there are quite a lot of people here, most of them aren't in good condition, especially their skin. Perhaps it's because of the climate and environment, most of them are too rough and dark. I'm not discriminating against them, but since they're performing for everyone, they should at least look pleasing to the eyes. It's better to avoid those who don't look interesting at first glance." After saying this, Shui Qing made a gesture of touching her forehead. "Well, after being busy for more than an hour, we only found 3 good seedlings." After saying this, she handed a roster to Beta Persei. Due to their relationship with Yang Chundong, the people of Xianxia were more used to using hours instead of hours when talking about time. However, they only found 3 suitable people in more than an hour. This was indeed a lot of pressure for the publicity department that had to recruit 200 students. Beta Persei pretended not to care and took a look at the roster. The name of the last of the 3 recruited people, Kikij, came into his eyes. "Chichigo, that's a nice name." He still asked as if he didn't know anything about it. It had to be said that after being by Yang Chundong's side for a long time, Yang Heir had learned to do things in a roundabout way. He had also learned some methods. If it was in the past, he might have directly asked questions. Yes. Speaking of Kikij, Shui Qing seemed to be very interested. "I don't know how this girl takes care of herself. Her skin is good and she has a good dancing foundation. She's a talent that our publicity department urgently needs. You haven't seen her, but even if she wore the most simple clothes, you can still see that she's a delicate flower." Shui Qing said unintentionally, or rather, she said it as if she was showing off. When Tiger's Mane heard everything, he was even more certain that the girl he saw should be Kikij. This was because when he entered the big house, he observed that there were many girls who came and they were all dressed in colorful clothes. He thought that on such an occasion, they would wear the most beautiful clothes and leave the best first impression for others. Kikij did not wear any colorful clothes. Perhaps it was because of her personality, or perhaps that was the best she had. Unfortunately, Kikij was too happy. After knowing that she was chosen, She left in a hurry and did not even leave an address. This made Beta Persei unable to find out more even if he wanted to. Of course, with his identity, it was not impossible for him to find someone in the beginning city based on his name. However, that would be too much of a waste of manpower and material resources. Beta Persei did not want to be special. He thought that since this girl would come to work in the publicity department, as long as he had the heart, would he be afraid that he would not have the opportunity to see her? Beta Persei was still thinking about the next opportunity to meet Kikij when Kikij returned home in high spirits. However, as soon as she entered the room, she saw her brother Batu, squatting on the ground, and her mother Badama, comforting him. Batu, don't think too much. The mercenaries are doing this for your own good. Who asked you to have no brothers in the family? This is also for our family's sake. Badama said earnestly and reached out to stroke Batu's hair. She was undoubtedly a loving mother. What's going on? Kikij, who had a premonition, looked at her mother and brother and asked as she walked forward. Sister, they don't want me. They said that I'm the only son in the family. When Batu heard his sister's voice, he quickly raised his head. When he looked at Kikij, his eyes were full of grievances. If Batu's performance was not good enough and his physical fitness was not strong enough, it might still be sad, but it was also difficult for Batu to accept. However, he passed the basic physical fitness assessment and even got a good result in his equestrian performance. However, when they finally investigated his family situation and learned that he was the only son, they directly rejected him. According to the mercenary examiner, it was too dangerous for the only son to go to the battlefield. They could not use the future of a family as an excuse. Logically speaking, these words were really for the sake of these Mongolian youths. The mercenaries didn't want to end the bloodline of these youths. After all, anything could happen on the battlefield, and the enemy wouldn't take extra care of you just because you were the only child of your clan. However, the situation of Batu's family needed to be changed urgently, especially his mother's illness. He had to find a way to treat it as soon as possible. If he could not join the army, what else could he do? Not to mention that he did not earn much from doing manual labor. It was already early winter. What else could he do? Batu was a filial child. He was anxious to rely on his own efforts to change his family. In his opinion, this was what an indomitable man should do. Kikij was also shocked by this statement. Her brother woke up very early today, even earlier than her sister who had to wake up to make breakfast. His eagerness to join the army was already very obvious. She originally thought that her brother was tall and strong. He would definitely be a good seedling if he joined the army. However, she did not expect that he would be rejected with such a reason. This was really unexpected. How about little brother not join the army? I have already been chosen to join the publicity department. In the future, I will have a salary of 10 taels of silver a month. Our family situation will slowly change. The originally good news, now that it came out of Kikij's mouth, it did not seem that surprising anymore. Ah, sister, have you been chosen? That's great. Batu, who was still squatting on the ground, was pleasantly surprised when he heard the news. However, he quickly lowered his head again. His sister could do things for the family, but he, a 7 feet tall man, could not do anything. This seemed to reflect his incompetence. Hearing that his daughter was chosen by the publicity department, Badama was also very happy. Good, I knew my daughter was the best. There's no problem. In any case, there was still good news. Badama actually said that he wanted to borrow some food from the neighbors to celebrate. Moreover, for the first time, she did not allow Kikij to interfere. In her words, her daughter's hands would be of great use in the future, so it was better not to do these manual labor. His mother went to work alone. Batu was in a bad mood. He returned to his room and covered himself with a blanket to sleep, leaving Kikij alone. However, her feelings were actually very complicated. She really wanted to help her brother. Just like the Han people, the Mongols also had the idea of valuing boys over girls. No matter how good a daughter was, she would eventually have to marry someone. Only when the man in her family had a promising future would he be able to bring real change to the family. The relationship between the two of them had been very good since they were young. As the elder sister, Kikij didn't want to see her younger brother depressed and upset. She would rather not be chosen than to see this scene happen. No, I have to help my brother. A firm voice rang out in his heart. Chi said that he had something to do and left the room. In her mind, she thought about what Beta Persei had said to her. If you have any problems, you can come to me. She decided to give it a try. No matter what, he was still in the Yang residence. It shouldn't be a problem for him to help her brother with this small matter. Beta Persei did not expect that while he was still thinking about Kikij in his heart, she would actually come to his door so quickly. He was still on duty by Yang Chindong's side. After reporting what he saw at the publicity office, he became a little absent-minded. With Yang Chindong's observation skills, he naturally noticed this, but he did not ask anything. He believed that if there was really something big, Beta Persei would definitely report to him. It was also at this time that the second guard captain, Dao Xiao, entered the room. Seeing the sixth young master sitting there reading a book, he carefully went to Beta Persei's side. Beta Persei, GE. Someone is looking for you outside. It's a girl called Kikij. Chapter 755. Originally, Yang Heir still looked listless. Looking at the situation, he wanted to ask who was looking for him, but when he suddenly heard Ji's name, he didn't even report to Yang Chindong. Instead, he rushed out of the house and disappeared without a trace. What's going on? Yang Chindong noticed Beta Persei's abnormal behavior. He did not ignore it, but asked Dao Xiao, who seemed to know some inside information. Dao Xiao was not gossiping, but he had to answer the sixth young master's question. He immediately told him what happened in the morning at the entrance of the publicity office. He was very objective. He even reported what Beta Persei said to Xue Qing. Yang Chindong was smart. He immediately knew that Beta Persei had fallen in love with a girl called Kikij. Beta Persei was not young anymore, and Yang Chindong never stopped his subordinates from dating and getting married. There was even a period of time when he wanted to find a wife for Beta Persei. He did not expect that the opportunity would come to him. Since it had happened, he could not ignore it. After all, Beta Persei was someone close to him. If something happened, it would be a big deal. Go find Feng Liang. Tell him that I said it. I want to know more about Kikij, her family, and the people around her, Yang Chindong ordered Dao Xiao. Although it was a coincidence, and there should not be any problems with Kikij, things were unpredictable. Without investigation, there was no right to speak. Beta Persei did not know that Kikij's matter had attracted the sixth young master's attention. He only knew that the girl in his heart had appeared, and that was enough to make him excited. After running out of the room, Beta Persei quickly calmed down. First, he tidied up his clothes and found that there was nothing wrong. Then, he walked out of the Yang mansion's gate with steady steps. The sixth young master had said that the more important the matter was, the calmer one had to be in order to make the most accurate decision. Yang Heir also learned to calm down, but when he went out and saw Kikij standing there with her head lowered, he was discouraged. He realized that his heartbeat was very disappointing. No matter how hard he tried to calm down, he couldn't calm his heart down. Perhaps Beta Persei was worried that the girl already had a husband. It's you, Kikij, right? My name is Beta Persei. No matter what kind of worries he had, Beta Persei decided to get to know her first. If she was not betrothed, then his chance had come. While introducing himself, he also extended an arm that represented friendship. Unfortunately, he did not get a response from Kikij. The other party was not used to this at all. Seeing Second Yang reach out his hand to her as soon as they met, she was shocked. Her whole body involuntarily stepped back, and her eyes revealed fear. She almost shouted, "What do you want to do?" Hee hee. Seeing that his actions were a little frightening, Beta Persei smiled foolishly and retracted his hand. He touched his head and broke the awkwardness by asking, "You must have something to tell me. Speak." Beta Persei extended his hand as soon as they met, which was not considered polite at the time. It made Kikij feel that she had found the wrong person. After all, that action was a little too frivolous. However, Beta Persei expressed his goodwill and asked if she had anything to tell him. This made Kikij hesitate for a while before she bit her lip and made up her mind. "Our family has encountered a little problem and we would like to ask for your help, but I don't know if you can help." Beta Persei was delighted when he heard this. This was a good opportunity to understand Kikij's family. He would know what kind of person she was as soon as he went, so how could he refuse? As for his ability, There should not be many people in the beginning city who would not give him face. Beta Persei was of course full of confidence in the things he was good at. He patted his strong chest and said, "I can still do ordinary things." Beta Persei's appearance seemed to give Kikij confidence. She really had no other choice. It seemed that among the people she knew, only Beta Persei seemed to have some status. "Well, it's about my younger brother. His name is Ba too." In the end, Kikij told Beta Persei about the family matters, but it was only limited to her younger brother. She did not tell him about her mother's illness and poor health. It was the first time they met, so it would be rude to tell him everything. Beta Persei listened carefully. At this time, he felt that Kikij's voice was so pleasant to the ear. Even though she was a little pouting when she spoke Chinese and was not even fluent, he felt that it was nice to hear. Perhaps this was what it meant by beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Kikij finished speaking very quickly, but when she saw that Beta Persei was still listening carefully, she could not help but ask anxiously, Are you listening?" "Oh, I'm listening." Beta Persei quickly returned to his body and nodded. "The younger brother you mentioned has good physical fitness. He's already an adult, right? But because he's the only son in the family, he can't join the army, right?" "Yes, that's it. Do you have any ideas?" After listening, Kikij's hopeful eyes fell on Beta Persei. Beta Persei enjoyed this kind of gaze very much, but he also felt a lot of pressure. This was the time to show his ability. If he did not perform well, he was afraid that there would be no chance for what would happen next. With Beta Persei's identity, if he greeted the conscription office, the problem of Batu joining the army would definitely be solved in the most appropriate way, and even the best arrangements would be made. After all, he was one of the people around the sixth young master, so he definitely had some face. However, after following Yang Qindong for a long time, Beta Persei trusted his eyes more than his ears. He decided to take a look at Batu personally to see if he was really as tall and strong as Kikij said. Of course, no one knew if he would take this opportunity to understand Kikij's family situation. "How about this? Can I meet your brother? If he's really as good as you said, then I should be able to help." Beta Persei did not immediately make a promise. Instead, he wanted to understand the situation before making a decision. Kikij hesitated. She was not worried about Beta Persei's ability. After all, they were at the entrance of the Yang mansion, where he came from. Would the people around the god of war and the messenger of Tengri be bad people? She was only worried about the situation at home. For some reason, she did not want Beta Persei to see the situation at home. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Seeing that Kikij did not immediately agree, Beta Persei asked. Logically speaking, since he had agreed to help, the other party should be happy and should immediately lead the way. Could it be that there was something that was hard to say? Or was it that she was already married, and if she brought another man home, others would gossip about her? No problem. Kikij bit her lips again and said. Then, as if she had made some kind of decision, she said, "I'll take you to my house to see my brother." In Kikij's heart, there was nothing more important than her brother's matter. "Okay, wait for me." Beta Persei's heart also settled down. Then, he chuckled and turned to the sentinel standing guard at the entrance of the Yang mansion and said, "Go and call out Ba Daojiang's group of brothers. Also, send someone to tell Captain Dao Xiao that I'm going out to handle some personal matters." As one of Yang Qindong's people, Beta Persei had to inform him wherever he went, even if it was not a matter of freedom. Of course, there was no need to report to Yang Qindong and disturb the sixth young master when he went out to handle some personal matters. However, someone in the mansion had to know. The sentinel was also a soldier of the guards. Seeing that it was Beta Persei who had spoken, he immediately agreed and turned to enter the mansion. Not long after, Ba Daojiang led 5 guards out of the mansion and came to Beta Persei's side. Ba Daojiang is ordered to lead the soldiers to report to Beta Persei. As soon as Ba Daojiang appeared, he saluted and said seriously. This was not Beta Persei putting on airs, but doing things according to the rules set by Yang Qindong. The rules required that no one was allowed to act alone when they went out. There had to be at least 4 to 6 people. This was also for their safety. Although the security in the first city seemed to be very good, this was a new city after all. There were many Mongolians in the city. If they were not careful, wouldn't they be asking for trouble if there were any losses? Ba Daojiang had a total of 6 people behind him. Beta Persei turned to look at Kikij and said in a gentle tone, "Okay, you lead the way." Seeing that Second Yang was able to bring 6 soldiers with him just by saying a few words, and they were all from the Yang residence, Chi-Chi-Gu thought even more highly of Second Yang's ability. He nodded and said, "All right, follow me. However, my home is a bit far from the city. I'm afraid it's a bit far." "It doesn't matter. We don't have any other abilities, but we're not afraid of being tired." "Ha!" Beta Persei patted his chest and said. Kikij did not lie. They walked for nearly 2 hours. He did not know how a girl like her walked from her house to the Yang mansion's entrance alone. When Kikij finally stopped in front of an extremely ordinary-looking door, Beta Persei knew that they had finally arrived. He could not help but curse in his heart. "It seems that I have to ride here next time. The distance is indeed a little too far." In fact, in the first city, people were not allowed to ride horses on the streets without special reasons. Firstly, it was easy to collide with people on horseback. Secondly, horses had horse dung, which would increase the difficulty of cleaning the clean streets in the city. But riding a bicycle was different. It was clean and fast. Of course, other than Beta Persei and the others, it would not be so easy for ordinary people to get a bicycle. When they finally arrived at the door of Kikij's house, Beta Persei's expression became much more solemn. He even tried to squeeze out more smiles on his face. He wanted to leave a good first impression. Chapter 756. There was no such thing as individual houses in the beginning city. They were all collectively owned, which meant that they all belonged to Yang Chendong. Everyone who came here was just renting a house. According to the rules, only those who had worked in the beginning city for more than 5 years were qualified to buy a house here. This caused the houses here to look the same from the outside. The so-called differences were only the various differences after entering the rooms. For example, the furnishings in the house, the decent items in the house, and so on. However, when Beta Persei followed Kikij into the house, he really did not see anything decent. It gave him a feeling of emptiness and then cleanliness. Cleanliness did not mean that there was nothing clean, but it meant that the house was wiped clean. From this, it could be seen that this family was very hardworking. When Kikij came back and brought some soldiers with him, Ba Dama and Ba Tu, who were cooking, were frightened. They stood up and stood there cautiously, not knowing what to do. After all, the mercenaries were usually seen patrolling the streets with a meticulous look. Suddenly coming into such close contact with them, it was more or less a little difficult for them to adapt. "Mother, brother, this is Beta Persei. He is from the Yang residence." "Brother Beta Persei, this is my mother, Ba Dama, and my brother, Ba Tuesday." Kikij stood between the two sides and introduced them to each other. "So it's auntie and brother. Hello, my name is Beta Persei." Beta Persei was very enthusiastic and generous. But this time, he did not reach out his hand, afraid that he would leave a bad impression on the other party. When she heard from her daughter that the person was from the Yang residence, the expression on Ba Dama's face immediately became very nervous. "So it's a soldier from the Yang residence. Please take a seat in the house." Seeing Ba Dama's nervousness, Beta Persei chuckled again and said, "Auntie, you can call me Beta Persei. You don't have to call me soldier." As he spoke, Beta Persei had already stepped into the house and saw a plate of mutton on the table. Although the portion was small, it looked crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It seemed to be very delicious. This should be Kikij's lunch. Seeing Beta Persei staring at the mutton, Badama said with an unnatural expression, "Kikij was chosen by the publicity team. Our family is preparing to celebrate for her. If you want to try it, you can try it. Ba-Tu, why don't you add another knife disc?" After Ba-Tu agreed, he turned around and walked to the kitchen. However, Beta Persei reached out to stop him. "Is this how you celebrate? There should be something delicious left, right? Bring it all up." Of course, Beta Persei was not craving mutton. In fact, after coming to the grasslands, he had eaten mutton the most. However, eating the same thing every day for a long time would make anyone sick of it. The reason why Beta Persei said this was because he saw that this plate of mutton should be the only dish for Kikij's celebration. When he first entered the house, he smelled some potatoes. If he guessed correctly, there should be potato cubes in the pot, which could be regarded as a staple food in the house. Wanting to see the other dishes in front of everyone put Badama in a difficult position. However, she was older after all, and her skin was thicker. She shook her head and said, "This is the celebratory dish we prepared for Kikij. This is the one I borrowed from the neighbor. When Kikij receives his monthly salary, he will have to return it." Since he had already said everything, there was nothing left to hide. Thus, Badama revealed everything to him. Hearing this, Beta Persei's face did not show any surprise. He just had mixed feelings in his heart. This was the life of the Mongolian people. Those Khans still wanted to fight for territory and fought every day. The lives of the people were so difficult. Who would care? This was also because he had been with young Chendong for a long time and learned to be compassionate. However, Beta Persei was not the sixth young master. He quickly returned to reality. First, he glanced at Kikij, then his gaze fell on the door and shouted, "Badeo Jiang, come in." As soon as his voice fell, the door opened. Badeo Jiang, who was dressed in a military uniform, strode in. "Brother Beta Persei, what can I do for you?" "Send someone to the nearest restaurant and get 6 dishes and some good wine. Remember, be quick." Beta Persei's voice carried an unquestionable air of command. "Yes." 8 Dao Jiang Ili saluted and turned to carry out the orders. Kikij's family of 3 looked at him. In the end, Badeoma said, "No need, we're used to eating this. It's fine if we eat this normally, but today is a day to celebrate Kikij. How can we just do it casually? Just get 6 dishes to show that everything is going well." Beta Persei looked as if he had made up his mind. Then, he did not dwell on this matter. Instead, his gaze fell on Ba Tuesday. "I heard from your sister that your physical fitness is good, but you weren't selected because you're the only son?" Ba Tu was still upset about the fact that he didn't enlist in the army. Suddenly, young heir asked him such a question, which made him see hope. He nodded and said, "Yes, I passed the physical fitness test and the equestrian test. My results were good. But when it came to my family, they said that I was the only son in the family and persuaded me to leave." Speaking of this, Ba Tu still had an aggrieved look on his face full of indignation. "Yes." Beta Persei nodded. This was the same as what Kikij said. Seeing Beta Persei nod, Ba Tu was full of hope. He thought that since this person was from the Yang residence and could order other soldiers at will, he should have some status. As long as he was willing to help, there should be no problem. While he was still thinking about this, Beta Persei had already spoken. The people in the recruitment office are right to do this. This is also the intention of the god of war. After all, people will die in war. He is actually thinking for you. Even Beta Persei said that this was the right thing to do. Ba Tu, who had just seen hope, could not help but lower his head again. Didn't this mean that there was no hope for him to enlist in the army? Just when Ba Tu lowered his head and Kikij and his mother's faces were also gloomy, Beta Persei suddenly spoke again. "There are exceptions. If you really want to rely on enlisting in the army to protect the first city and want to use this to make a name for yourself, this feeling is understandable and can be satisfied. But there is one thing. People may die in war. Are you afraid of death? And Auntie, if Ba Tu dies gloriously on the battlefield, can you accept it?" Things suddenly took a turn for the better, and Kikij's family of 3 could not help but feel their eyes light up. Next, Ba Tu spoke first. "I can accept it. People will always die in war. If I die in war, it means that my skills are not as good as others. There is nothing to regret." "Okay. What do you think, Auntie?" Young-er couldn't help but ask. Then, she turned her gaze towards Badama. As a mother, who would want to see her son get into trouble? Who would be willing to see her son die? However, Badama knew her son's ambition. She thought that people would die eventually, either vigorously or without life. She nodded heavily. "Life and death are up to fate. I support my son." "Then there's no problem." Hearing such an answer, Beta Persei said as if he was making a guarantee. "Ah, there's no problem?" Kikij, who was at the side, did not understand. What did this mean? Could it mean that Ba Tu could enlist in the army? Not only Kikij, but Ba Dama and Ba Tu also looked at Beta Persei with a puzzled expression. He had to add, "How about this? I'll take Ba Tu to the recruitment office in a while. As long as he passes the previous physical fitness and equestrian assessment, then he can enter the barracks in the afternoon. But for the 1 to 3 months of recruit training, I'm afraid you won't be able to meet him. That's a closed training, so you have to be mentally prepared in this regard. It's okay, I can bear it. As if afraid that Beta Persei would go back on his word, Batu hurriedly shouted. At this time, he could not wait to go to the barracks with Beta Persei immediately. As for whether he would eat or not, it did not matter. There's no hurry. The food will be delivered soon. We'll go after eating. Xianxia chuckled. At this moment, Kikij also laughed. From time to time, her eyes would look at Beta Persei. Her expression was full of a different kind of feeling. Ba Daojiang was very fast. After a while, he returned with 6 dishes. 4 of them were meat, 2 were vegetables, and a large pot of white rice. Kikij did not know how long it had been since she had such a sumptuous lunch. With Beta Persei taking the lead, everyone ate until they were full. Then, when Kikij looked at Beta Persei, there was a trace of tenderness in her eyes. Cough, cough, cough. Suddenly, Ba Dama coughed out of the blue. It was followed by a long bout of non-stop coughing until his face turned red. Only then did he slowly recover. What's going on? Auntie has caught a cold. Didn't she go to the hospital in the city? Beta Persei noticed that neither Kikij nor Batu showed any surprise at this moment. It was as if they were used to it. He suddenly felt that something was wrong and asked with concern. Yes, but the cost of the hospital is too high. We can't afford it. Kikij answered, but as she spoke, her voice became softer and softer. How can this be? If you're sick, you have to see a doctor. This can't be delayed. How about this? Send Auntie to the hospital immediately. I'll pay for the cost. Beta Persei knew that his opportunity to perform had come again, so he said without hesitation. Chapter 757. How can we do that? We already owe you too much. Kikij's face turned red as she spoke. At that moment, she even thought of selling her body to save her mother. Why not? You and your brother are going to serve the mercenaries soon. You can return the money you earn to me in the future. Besides, you and Batu are going to join the army, so Auntie will be considered a military family member. She will be taken care of in the hospital and the fees will be reduced a lot. Don't hesitate, this matter is settled. Beta Persei said in an unquestionable tone. At that moment, he had undoubtedly become a pillar of support for Kikij's family. After the meal, Beta Persei first accompanied Badama's family to the hospital. When Xianxia appeared here, even the director was shocked. Then, he found the best doctor. After seeing him, he concluded that it was only caused by the cold. There was nothing wrong with him. He just needed to stay in the hospital and take medicine to recuperate for a while. At that moment, Beta Persei asked for a room to be admitted to the hospital. Naturally, he was given the green light. Under the principle of special treatment, Badama was soon admitted to the hospital. Next, Beta Persei accompanied Batu to the recruitment office. Since he had shown up, the officers there naturally obeyed. Batu's name appeared on the recruits' roster and he was asked to arrange a place to live and receive the corresponding equipment. At this point, he had done what he had promised. Kikij, who had been following beside him, also found that her mother and brother were not around. She was alone with Beta Persei. Ba Daojiang and the others naturally kept a certain distance from the two of them. Seeing that there was no one around, Kikij's face turned even redder. Thank you for everything you've done for our family. Hey, it's nothing. Since you think so highly of the mercenaries, it's only right that we do something for you. Beta Persei said casually. But after saying this, his face turned a little red. He seemed to have thought of something but did not dare to say it out loud. What happened to you? Looking at Beta Persei's awkward appearance, Kikij asked curiously. He did not look as heroic as he did in the hospital and the recruitment office just now. Beta Persei, who was questioned by Kikij, blushed again, but in the end, he gritted his teeth and said as if he had made up his mind, can I visit you at the publicity office in the future? Kikij didn't expect it to be this question. For a moment, her face turned red like a ripe apple. If she still did not know what Beta Persei was thinking, she would be too stupid. Kikij did not answer. Beta Persei became a little anxious. I just want to see you. I won't disturb your work. I'll just look at you from afar, okay? Yes. After waiting for a long time, Kikij finally gave a response. Although it was only one word, it carried a lot of signals. It also caused young heir to be beaming with joy. He was extremely excited. When it was time for dinner, Beta Persei returned to the Yang residence in high spirits, but found that Yang Qindong had not eaten yet and was waiting for him. He hurried over. "Young master, it's late. You should have dinner. I'm waiting for you. Let's eat together." Yang Qindong's voice was flat, but when he said that, Beta Persei felt that he had to obey. As Xianxia continued to expand, although Yang Qindong was only a young man in his 20s, the aura of a superior was very strong. It was no exaggeration to say that he already had the aura of a superior without being angry. Even in the face of the beaming emperor, he would not be afraid. The meal was served. It was only 4 dishes and 1 soup. Beta Persei accompanied Yang Qindong for dinner. After the things were taken away, Yang Qindong looked at Beta Persei. "Is there anything you want to say to me?" Knowing that nothing could escape the 6th young master's eyes, Beta Persei did not intend to hide anything. He told him everything that happened today from beginning to end. When he finished, he said shyly, "Young master, I like Kikij. I want to take her as my concubine." When he said that he wanted to take her as his concubine, Yang Qindong's originally calm expression showed a trace of appreciation. He had previously made a rule that the cold blade warriors and above could only marry Han women. No matter how good other women were, they could only be taken as concubines. For Beta Persei to say such words, it was obvious that he was following this rule. After knowing that Beta Persei had a sense of propriety, Yang Qindong had no intention of obstructing him. Instead, he nodded and said, "Okay, you can do as you see fit. How about this? Tell me what you've seen and learned from Kikij's family." After knowing that Yang Qindong would not obstruct him in Kikij, Beta Persei also became energetic. He immediately said in detail, "Young master, the Mongolian people are too poor. Not only do they not have enough to eat, but they also have no money to treat their illness. There should be many people like this in the beginning city." "That's right, the people are too poor. How about this? Pass down the order that all military families will have their rent reduced by half. In the future, they will be able to enjoy a 20% discount when buying rice and meat, and a 50% discount when treating illnesses. But you have to be careful that only 1 wife and 1 concubine of a mercenary warrior can enjoy this treatment. Those who marry several at once can forget about it." Yang Qindong could help others, but the premise was that others approved of him. If anyone who entered the beginning city could receive such treatment, not only would they need a lot of money as subsidies, but it would also be easy for others to take advantage of the loopholes. Being a mercenary was equivalent to facing life and death at any time. Such a sacrifice was worth a certain amount of return. On the contrary, those who just wanted to find a safe place to live and did not want to pay any price could forget about it. He was not a god who could guarantee that everyone would live a good life. Even if he was a savior, he would only save those who needed to be saved and those who worked hard and contributed. Hearing Yang Qindong's actions, Beta Persei solemnly saluted Yang Qindong. This was his gratitude to the 6th young master on behalf of the mercenary families. The next morning, Yang Qindong's new order was spread to the entire city. Instantly, the entire city was in an uproar. Regardless of whether it was those who signed up to join the army or those who wanted to join the publicity department, there were more and more people. After all, as a military family, they had such generous conditions, so it was impossible for them not to join the army even if they wanted to. This kind of spontaneous behavior quickly allowed the publicity department to find 200 good seedlings, filling up the 6,000 slots of the recruitment office. Even so, who knew how many people were still racking their brains to join the ranks of the military? However, rules were rules. In the end, Yu Mian stood up and said that if they wanted to join the army, they would have a chance in the future and would not accept them for the time being. If anyone gathered together and disturbed the order in the city, they would be arrested and disqualified from joining the army in the future. In special times, special methods were needed to govern the city. The beginning city became quiet again and was gradually shrouded by a heavy snow. Just as it seemed calm and many forces on the grassland were hiding for the winter, 2 pieces of news came from the Security Bureau. The director of the Security Bureau of the beginning city, Feng Liang, appeared in the Yang residence. Sitting in a warm room with a stove wall, Yang Qindong carefully read the 2 pieces of news and put them aside. "Tell me, how do you feel?" Knowing that the 6th young master was testing him, Feng Liang pondered for a moment, organized his words and raised his head. Sixth young master, in this subordinate's opinion, these two matters should have nothing to do with each other. It's good that Baiming has developed a new type of cannon, but the results have just come out. However, Zhang Quan and the others have been gone for some time. Judging from the time, they should not have received this news when they set off, so there is no connection, let alone any threat. I can only say that everything is just a coincidence. The two things that Feng Liang reported were that Baiming had developed a new type of cannon and that the eunuch guarding the Datong residence, Zhang Quan, was already 20 miles away and would soon enter the beginning city. Ever since Yang Qindong defeated Yes Hen of the Wara with the name of the god of war, Baiming's imperial court saw the importance of firearms. They first tried their best to get a Type 81 gun and began to develop an imitation. However, without any guidance, they could only rely on the imitation and the progress was very slow. At least until now, they had not been able to create it. On the other hand, cannons were different. They knew that only an explosion could cause the greatest lethality after the cannon was fired, so they just had to find a way to do it. Originally, Baiming had an artillery battalion, but the cannonballs fired by the artillery battalion were only large iron balls. Wherever they hit, they would leave a hole. The lethality of the cannonballs was too small, and only those standing in the front of the cannonballs would be threatened. However, after all, they had a certain foundation. After understanding the principle and investing a lot of manpower and energy, they finally received news that a new type of cannon had been developed. This news was sent by Yang Guang, who was in charge of the artillery battalion. During the Battle of the Capital, Yang Guang was Yang Qindong's subordinate. Later on, they became friends during the battle. He also listened to Yang Qindong's arrangements and went to the artillery battalion. After more than 3 years, this move finally played its role and news came. The news came, but it was not completely clear what the new cannon looked like. This was also why Yang Qindong was somewhat distressed. It was also at this time that another piece of news came. Baiming's Datong guard eunuch Zhang Quan was ordered by the emperor to come to Shi City and have a good talk with Yang Qindong. In summary, these two matters seem to be related. It seemed that Baiming had a new type of cannon and had enough confidence, so they decided to have a good talk with this loyal duke. However, only Yang Qindong himself knew that they weren't close to each other. It was just a coincidence. Chapter 758. We still need to send someone to inquire about the new cannon. What exactly is it like? What are its functions and power? We have to find a way to find out. Although it's difficult, we'll try our best to do it. Yang Qindong gave the Security Bureau a direction for the first piece of news. Next, he talked about the second piece of news. When Zhang Quan arrives, arrange for Yu Mian to meet with them and discuss with them. Let's see if there are any regulations to report to me. It was true that Yu Mian was Yu Qian's son, but at that time, Yu Qian had disappeared. Baiming did not care about it. As his son, Yu Mian naturally did not need to work for Baiming. Based on this point, even Zhang Quan could not say anything. If he insisted on using this matter as an excuse, it could only be said that this person's IQ was too low. Yang Qindong had just made arrangements. That night, 1,000 Baiming guards arrived at the foot of the first city. They had already sent someone to report. When Zhang Quan and Captain Su Dei arrived at the foot of the city with the army, the city gate was already wide open. Many soldiers wearing large cotton-padded clothes with torches lined up on both sides of the road. Looking at their appearance, they were all in high spirits. When they looked at the Baiming army, their eyes lit up. They were like tigers that could open their bloody mouths at any time and eat people. Zhang Quan was not tall and his eyes were not big, but they were very spirited. They were like a pair of mouse eyes that kept flickering. It was obvious that this person was still somewhat clever. Captain Su, this is the territory of the Duke of Loyalty. You must instruct your soldiers not to cause trouble. Otherwise, no one can protect you. Looking at the formation at the city gate, Zhang Quan carefully said to Su Dei. At this moment, he was frightened by the situation. His legs were trembling and trembling. A eunuch was a eunuch after all. He relied on pleasing the emperor to obtain power. He had never been through the battlefield. How could he not be afraid in the face of the murderous aura of the mercenaries? This is the original Alakumaki? I only heard that it was pitifully small, but it doesn't look like it. Zhang Quan was extremely flustered. Firstly, The appearance of the mercenaries had frightened him. Secondly, he was shocked by the majestic city in front of him. At this moment, Su Dei was looking at the mercenaries standing outside the city. As a Jianghu, especially a Jianghu at the forefront of the front line, he was more professional than ordinary soldiers. Because of this, he could feel the valiant and murderous aura of the mercenaries. Hearing Zhang Quan's words, Su Dei nodded and said, "This place used to be pitifully small and abandoned for a long time. It seems like the loyal duke really put in a lot of effort here." Su Dei was different from other people. He started off as a corporal and worked his way up bit by bit. In the past, he had been to some places around the Great Ming Dynasty. Later, he was chosen by Commander Sun Hong and was promoted step by step to the position of Jianghu Guard. It was precisely because he had been to Arakumaki before that he was even more surprised than Zhang Quan when he suddenly saw the magnificent first city. If it weren't for the fact that the aura of these mercenaries was even more amazing, his attention would have been diverted to the city's buildings. The city gate opened, and there were still mercenaries walking out. After about half a cup of tea's time, when everything in sight was lit up by torches, a general wearing a black cloak rode out and stopped 3 meters in front of Zhang Quan and Su Dei. The war horse was stopped by the reins, but the general didn't get off the horse, nor did he report his name. He just stared at Zhang Quan and Su Dei with a scrutinizing gaze. After a long time, he slowly spat out 3 words. "Enter the city." Suddenly being stared at, Zhang Quan felt a chill run down his spine. Even Su Dei, who was at the side, was tense all the time. He just had a feeling that if something really happened, even if he drew his sword, he wouldn't be the other party's opponent. The person who came could give him a great sense of oppression. After saying these 3 words, the general in the black cloak turned and left. He didn't even look at Zhang Quan and Su Dei. It was as if the other party was an insignificant character who didn't deserve his attention at all. With someone leading the way, although he didn't appear to be a very good friend, Zhang Quan and Su Dei had nowhere to go. At this time, they could only follow the other party's footsteps and walk into the first city. The city was also dark. After all, it was late. Under the guidance of the general in the black cloak, they turned left and right and came to the front of an inn. There were already people waiting here to arrange their food, clothing, and accommodation. The area of the inn was not small, and each room was also very big. However, there were more than 1,000 Ming soldiers. When these people swarmed in, it was still a little crowded. However, from the beginning to the end, no one stood out to say anything strange. It was probably because they also knew that this was not their territory and talking nonsense was likely to bring about an unexpected disaster. These more than 1,000 people stayed in the designated inn. Until they went to bed, no one came to see them or sent anyone with status to receive them. Only the waiters in the inn were busy. They were just a few waiters. What could they find out from their mouths? At this time, Zhang Quan couldn't help but feel a little regretful. He didn't expect the people here in the first city to be so strong. It seemed that this trip to seek cooperation wouldn't be too smooth. If he had known this, he might not have chosen to come. Yang Chendong naturally couldn't guess what Zhang Quan was thinking. He heard Tiger's Mane report all kinds of things about Zhang Quan and the others in the Yang residence. He couldn't help but smile. Who arranged for Yi La to go out of the city to welcome them? It seemed that the general in the black cloak was the commander of the Nuzan cavalry regiment, Yi La. No wonder the murderous aura was so strong that even Su Dei was scared. "Young master, this is the joint idea of City Lord Yu Mian and I. We thought that the other party would come from afar, so we have to show them our strength first." Not understanding Yang Chendong's meaning, Tiger's Mane said tentatively. The 6th young master had previously said that he and Yu Mian would be in charge of the welcoming, but he hadn't expressed any attitude. Therefore, sending Yi La was also the idea of the 2 of them in order to intimidate the opponent. If they didn't strike the opponent's morale, they were afraid that some things wouldn't be easy to do next. Well, Yi La's murderous aura is strong. It should scare them so much that they won't be able to sleep well tonight. Yang Chendong still had a smile on his face. Obviously, he wasn't angry about Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian's choice. But in the end, he still said, "I'm afraid that just being a deterrent is not enough. How about this? Let them see the prosperity of the city tomorrow. One by one, is the way of civil and martial arts." Finally, there was a clear instruction. Tiger's Mane nodded repeatedly and said, "Yes, young master." I'll make the arrangements now. That night, whether it was Zhang Quan or Su Dei, they didn't sleep well. Looking at the situation in the beginning city, they really couldn't guarantee that their heads wouldn't be cut off when they fell asleep. As it turned out, this worry was unnecessary. The next morning, they opened their eyes without any problems. At this time, the inn was extremely lively. The food had already been prepared and served in front of them. There were 4 dishes and 1 soup, and it was a standard that was sufficient. Not only did Zhang Quan and Su Dei, but even the beaming soldiers below exclaim in surprise. What time is this? Where is this place? It was cold outside, and this was an isolated city. It should be extremely difficult to transport supplies here. However, the food was still so good. Not only were there meat dishes like mutton and pork, but there were also vegetarian dishes like chives, spinach, and celery. The green color on the plate was shocking. Behind the Datong prefecture was the land of Baiming. However, even in such a place, vegetables could only be seen for a few months in a year. In this season, most of the vegetables were potatoes, radishes, and cabbage. How could they eat such green food? This can't be the standard of food every day, right? Looking at the dishes on the table, Zhang Quan was surprised. Su Dei was also shocked by the reality in front of him. A voice sounded in his mind. This standard of food can't be continued. It's probably because I've just arrived and they're treating me well. Yes, that must be it. This breakfast was no less than the one that greeted them last night. It gave Zhang Quan, Su Dei, and the others a shock. Not long after breakfast, someone came to deliver a message saying that City Lord Yu Mian was dealing with government affairs and did not have time to see them. He asked Zhang Quan and the others to walk around the city. But at the same time, he also made a request, and that was to not invite too many people on this trip, let alone gather together. Otherwise, if something went wrong, both sides would lose face. After sending away the messenger, Zhang Quan muttered to himself for a moment before looking at Su Dei and saying, "Thousand Commander Su, since they're letting us look around without any defenses, we'll do as they wish. Let's arrange for the soldiers below to be led by a sergeant to walk around the city. At night, they'll report to us what they see. Remember to remind them not to make trouble out of nothing. Otherwise, no one can protect them." When he said the last sentence, Zhang Quan's expression was much more serious. When Su Dei heard this, he nodded and went to make arrangements. Hundreds of small groups led by the Ming army squad leaders left the inn and started to move through the city according to the directions they had divided. Zhang Quan and Su Dei didn't stay idle either. They also brought a few attendants to the main street of the first city. They went to the commercial street that the innkeeper had mentioned. The commercial street was something that Yang Qindong must build in every city that belonged to him. By gathering all the businesses in one place, not only could it be better managed, but it could also attract people's attention. Whether it was merchants or ordinary people, they could buy things better. Chapter 759. Based on agriculture, industry, commerce, and light industry. This was the way Yang Qindong chose to develop the economy. Vast land and abundant resources were naturally a characteristic of the Central Plains. However, don't forget that there was a large population behind it. If one wanted to support so many people, just collecting taxes from the land would not solve the fundamental problem. On the contrary, it would increase the burden of the people. Therefore, from the beginning, Yang Qindong only collected a small amount of land tax symbolically. Instead, he focused on commercial development. Merchants were engaged in trade. They played the game of buying at a low price and selling at a high price. Relatively speaking, they were considered as mental workers. Such people not only contributed less, but they also earned more. Compared to the farmers who faced the yellow soil with their backs facing the sky, the investment and harvest of both sides were completely not proportional. This ratio may not be seen in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the contradictions would inevitably begin to deepen. Once the gap between the rich and the poor was widened, all kinds of problems would emerge one after another. Facts also prove that when every dynasty was first established, the social order was very good. However, as it continued to develop, there were more and more unfair things. In the end, society became more and more chaotic until one day, when it could no longer be suppressed, it was replaced by a new dynasty. In order to avoid income inequality and too big of a gap, Yang Chendong adopted a heavy tax on businesses and a small land tax on farmers. Although this could not completely avoid the existence of the gap, at least it was controlled to a relatively acceptable level. Only by walking on two legs could society develop normally and continuously improve. Naturally, while imposing heavy taxes, Yang Chendong also gave a certain amount of respect to businesses. Just like in terms of social status, they were constantly being raised. This was contrary to the national policy of the Great Ming Dynasty. In the Great Ming Dynasty, the status of merchants was so low that it was even lower than the ordinary people. In the eyes of others, they were people who reaped without sowing. They were unscrupulous people who talked about money and were disgraced by others. However, in the territory controlled by Xianxia, merchants were quite respected because they paid a heavy tax to society. This was equivalent to making a great contribution. With the rise in status, more and more businessmen were willing to come to Xianxia's territory to develop their businesses. As a matter of fact, they earned quite a bit. After all, the goods produced by Crimson City were so novel, high quality, and few in number. It could be said that the demand exceeded the supply. It could be said that in the environment at that time, as long as one had the means to obtain the goods produced in Crimson City, one would not have to worry about selling them. The only difference was how high the price of the goods could be. If it had to be summed up in 8 words, it would be that there was no highest, only higher. Business was so profitable that it had become an important cornerstone of Xianxia's development. Even so, how could Yang Chendong let go of such a good opportunity so easily? At the beginning of the construction of the first city, he had planned out a commercial street. He waited for the cement and steel bars to arrive from the Crimson City by sea to begin construction. Then, a large number of goods began to fill this street, causing it to quickly become prosperous and lively. This was exactly what Zhang Quan and Su Dei saw. They were surprised to find that even though it was snowing heavily outside, it was still very cold. But in the commercial street, it was indeed a bustling scene. People were squeezing and huddling together. From afar, it was as bustling as the center of the capital. If there had to be a difference, it would be that the clothes of the people here were very different from those in the capital of Beiming. Here, they could see merchants wearing all kinds of strange clothes. Most of them were Mongolian merchants, and there might be merchants from further regions and countries. But what surprised Zhang Quan was that he also saw merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty here. Why would merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty appear in the grassland? Could it be that they had secretly joined the Mongolian tribe? With such doubts, Zhang Quan personally walked up to a merchant who was wearing the same clothes as the people of the Great Ming Dynasty. They seemed to be chatting, but at the same time, they seemed to be asking something. The merchant did not know Zhang Quan's true identity. He only felt that this person gave him a feminine feeling. But the other party spoke the language of the Great Ming Dynasty, and this could not be fake. Moreover, the other party's clothes were the same as his. Since they were both from the Great Ming Dynasty, the merchant had a natural sense of closeness. Under Zhang Quan's intention, the two sides quickly chatted, and the conversation was very congenial. After nearly half an hour, Zhang Quan returned to Su Dei's side, but his expression was somewhat ugly. "Eunuch Zhang, what's going on? Why is there a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty here?" Su Dei had been curious for a long time, and finally had the opportunity to ask. "He is indeed a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty, and he is from our Beiming." Zhang Quan's status was naturally higher than Su Dei's, but considering that he still needed the other party to ensure his safety this time, he did not hide anything. He did not join the Mongolian tribe, nor did he join the Duke of Zhongdan. He is buying goods here because he wants to sell them back to our Beiming. Ah! Buying goods from the grassland and selling them back to Beiming? This can take more than 20 days? Hearing this answer, Su Dei was also shocked and said with a puzzled expression. "But our Beiming no longer has any goods. Or rather, we have goods, but they are controlled by those aristocratic families and important ministers in the Imperial court. Small merchants like this have no share at all." They also heard about what happened in the beginning city, and they also heard that as long as they have money, they can get the goods here. Moreover, as real Han people, they can get a 5% discount when they get the goods. Driven by benefits, they will come even if they are far away. Zhang Quan said this expressionlessly, but in fact, his heart was bleeding. Speaking of which, Zhang Quan was able to become the eunuch guarding the Datong prefecture, and he also had a backer in the palace. Even his name was in the heart of the Daizong Zhu Qiyu, and he could be considered to be in the privileged class. However, he was also in the privileged class, and he still had to be divided into factions. He was very pessimistic about some of the influential people in the capital. Some people only relied on the power in their hands to do some things that took advantage of others. Once there was a problem, they might not have the ability to solve the problem. Even so, these people who did not have much ability and only knew how to play tricks had a prosperous career. Some of them even received the favor of the emperor, which made Zhang Quan even more furious. With this understanding and now hearing this merchant's words, it was no wonder that his expression became very bad. Zhang Quan saw something deeper, which was the decay and decline of the great Ming dynasty. Although it was a small matter, it did give him a different feeling. Here, all he saw was prosperity, youthfulness, and hope. Su Dei was only a Jianghu. Perhaps he could not think of so many things, but he also knew that in the long run, the influence of the beginning city would grow bigger and bigger. One day, it would have the power to replace the great Ming dynasty. While the two of them were still lamenting in their hearts, a mercenary soldier in military green suddenly came. "My lords, our city lord invites you." Was he finally going to see the city lord? Zhang Quan nodded to Su Dei and then said, "Please lead the way." This journey was very far, and they were 5 miles away from the city. Fortunately, horses had been prepared here, and the road had been completely cleared to ensure that they could travel unimpeded. Even so, after driving for nearly half an hour, they arrived at their destination. They came to a vegetable greenhouse area covered with plastic films. The soldier who led the way took out a special token that emitted a silver light from his body. No one stopped them all the way. When they finally arrived in front of a large shed area, he got off his horse, pointed to a large shed area, and said, "My lords, our city lord is inside. Please." Zhang Quan and Su Dei got off their horses and did not bring any entourage. In fact, not everyone could enter this shed. The two of them followed the soldier into the shed, and the first feeling they had was warmth. Compared to the cold weather outside, not only was the air here fresher, but the climate was also very pleasant, giving people the feeling that the 4 seasons were like spring. What greeted their eyes was not a white expanse, but was completely replaced by green. At this moment, Yu Mian, who was in front of a cucumber rack, turned his head with a smile on his face. He greeted them warmly, "Eunuch Zhang, Qianhu Su, you're here." Before they came, they knew that the city lord of the beginning city was called Yu Mian. He was the eldest son of Yu Qian, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. For this matter, the embroidered uniform guards and the East faction guards had also made a report to the Imperial court. The general idea was that they suspected that Yu Qian's disappearance had a lot to do with the mercenaries. However, everything was just a guess. Without any evidence, this matter was still unknown in the end. Now that he finally saw Yu Mian, the first thing Zhang Quan said was, "How is City Lord Yu? But I wonder if Assistant Minister Yu is doing well?" In the face of this obvious test, Yu Mian chuckled and replied politely, "My father is doing well. Thank you for your concern, Eunuch Zhang. All right, it's your first time here. How do you feel about our shed area?" He did not say much about Yu Qian's matter. This was also the result of Yu Mian asking Yang Chendong for advice. He knew that since Bai Ming had sent people here this time, they would definitely be interested in his identity. Naturally, they would not be able to avoid his father. When he asked about Yang Chendong, the answer he received was, half hidden, half revealed. After fully understanding this sentence, Yu Mian knew that even if he wanted to say that his father was still alive, he could not tell them what he had done. Thus he came up with this answer. Yu Mian took the initiative to change the topic, and Zhang Quan sighed in his heart. He knew that this question would end here. Not to mention whether it would cause trouble for him if he asked. He was afraid that the other party would not answer him even if he asked. During the meal, the guests and the host enjoyed themselves to the fullest, but after the meal, the atmosphere quickly cooled down. Because they all knew that it was time for negotiation, and it was time for them to state their conditions. There was a war of words going on in the tent area. In the Yang mansion in the beginning city, Yang Chendong was standing in front of the sand table and looking at it carefully. He had been standing here since lunch, and it had been nearly an hour since he finished his lunch. What is the 6th young master doing? Qiu Vi, the captain of the first guard on duty, finally couldn't help but ask when he saw Yang Chendong standing there for a long time without moving. To become a member of the guard, Loyalty was essential, not to mention physical fitness, but the most important thing was that they had to keep their mouths shut. Often by the sixth young master's side, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with some confidential matters. They had to know what could be said and what could not be said. Even the ordinary members knew about this, not to mention Cho Wu, who was the captain. However, he still asked. It was probably because there was only young heir in front of him. Moreover, he was indeed curious about this matter. I don't know. Beta Persei shook his head. Obviously, he couldn't see what the young master was doing. However, his intuition told him that the young master must have thought of something again. Perhaps something big would happen soon. Beta Persei was indeed someone who had been by Yang Qindong's side for many years. This time, he guessed correctly. After some time, Yang Qindong finally moved his body and said to Beta Persei, "Go and call Su Yunxing over." Su Yunxing, the commander of the reconnaissance battalion. Although his rank was not very high, he was someone whom Yang Qindong trusted very much. After being found by the guards, he immediately rushed to the Yang mansion and came to the hall. "Take a good look at this place. I want to know the details of his situation. Go and do it." Yang Qindong pointed to a place called Talu City on the sand table and ordered Su Yunxing. Su Yunxing left. Since it was an order from the sixth young master, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately sent the most elite force of the reconnaissance battalion to investigate Talu City. Not long after he left the Yang mansion, City Lord Yu Mian rushed over to report on his work. "Sixth young master, we had a preliminary meeting, but the results weren't very satisfactory." "Well, since it's a negotiation, naturally there won't be a result so soon. It's just that we can't wait any longer. How about this? Go and find them again tomorrow and tell them that we'll only give them 3 days. If they can't reach an agreement, then they can go back to where they came from." Yang Qindong spoke as if he had seen through everything. 3 days. Hearing this answer, Yu Mian was stunned. This time requirement was a bit too tight. Of course, he was more worried that with only 3 days, it would be difficult to reach an agreement. Yang Qindong seemed to see through his worries and chuckled. "Don't worry, go and talk. They should have a change tonight." In the inn, it was already dark. All the Baiming soldiers began to return to their teams. Then, all kinds of reports were continuously reported. The Baiming soldiers were not like the cold front warriors. All of them were capable in both civil and military matters. Many of them were illiterate. The so-called reports were mostly verbal reports. Zhang Quan and Su Dei listened to them talk about what they had seen in the city in the largest room in the inn. However, after only meeting a dozen Dakarches, Zhang Quan waved his hand in annoyance. "All right, tell them that there's no need to report anymore. I think they've seen the same thing." Zhang Quan was annoyed because all the Baiming soldiers who came to report were talking about the benefits of the beginning city. For example, the prosperity of this place. For example, the treatment of the soldiers here was good, the food was good, and the equipment was complete. For example, the people here were full of vitality. The people here didn't scold the army and only praised them. According to what these soldiers said, the beginning city was close to becoming a perfect city. Those who could live in this city, whether it was the soldiers or the people, were the happiest people in the world. In that case, what was the Datong mansion? What was the Baiming mansion? What was the Baiming capital? It was no wonder that Zhang Quan was so angry that he sent all of them away. Although he had long seen that the beginning city was extraordinary, now that everyone said this, it was still a little beyond his expectations. He was even wondering if it was right to let them out during the day. If this continued, the morale of the army would be affected. "Eunuch Zhang, I think it's better to let them stay in the inn tomorrow." Su Dei also saw the hidden danger and carefully reminded him. "I think it's okay." Zhang Quan glanced at Su Dei. He knew that the other party had the same worries and concerns as him, so he nodded. If this went on, he was really worried that the soldiers he brought would fall in love with this place and become deserters. If that happened, it would really be a huge loss of face. At this moment, Zhang Quan finally knew why the mercenaries allowed him to bring all the soldiers into the city instead of arranging a residence for them outside the city. As a result, no one stopped these soldiers from watching the show in the city. He thought about how he whimsically released all the soldiers in order to find out where the loopholes in the city were. He even had the opportunity to let them come into contact with the mercenaries and see if he could persuade them to work for him. But now, his soldiers had almost rebelled. Now that he thought about it, he had really shot himself in the foot. The beginning city had this kind of attraction. The more you knew, the easier it was to be roped in by them. In view of this, Zhang Quan and Su Dei came to the same conclusion. Tomorrow, they would imprison the soldiers and not allow them to walk on the streets freely. Early the next morning, the order was issued and immediately caused many soldiers to be unhappy. Many of them had heard yesterday that the mercenaries' publicity team would have a program today, and it was said that it would be very interesting. This was very tempting for the Baiming soldiers who had been guarding the border. Among them, Nie Zhengyi was the one who shouted the loudest. Nie Zhengyi was 25 years old. He was only 3 years older than Yang Chendong, but he was already a centurion. Like many soldiers guarding the border, Nie Zhengyi was born in a military family. This meant that he was destined to only be a soldier in his life. He had no other choice. Fortunately, although he was born in the same family, he seemed to like to join the army. He was the king of children since he was young. When he grew up, he also had a burly figure. After joining the army, he did not make it in time for the Battle of Tumu Fort. However, when Yes Hen led the Walla soldiers into the Hatao area and even wanted to invade Datong, he did participate in the battle. In that battle, he killed 4 enemies and captured 1 alive. He was forcefully promoted from the position of a squad leader to a centurion. It was precisely because of his military exploits that he had obtained everything he had that he was highly respected among the soldiers. At least in the centurion he led, everyone was willing to listen to him. Yesterday, he also heard from the people in the city that the publicity team would perform a program tomorrow. He also heard from the people that the actors in the publicity team were all young and beautiful. They had good figures and the performance was also very good. As the saying went, which young girl did not yearn for love and which man did not fall in love with women? Chapter 761. After all, Nie Zhengyi was a young man of 25 years old. He was quite handsome, especially his head. Girls would often blush when they saw his body. However, he was still single. Speaking of which, the border army at that time wasn't that poor. In addition, the Imperial court also had to consider the continuation of the army's household. For this reason, they were very concerned about the marriage of the soldiers. When a young lad reached that age, as long as he wanted to, he still had the ability to marry a woman. Nie Zhengyi could only blame himself for being too good. He had always wanted to find a good-looking, kind-hearted and good lady. There were ladies in the Datong prefecture, but young and beautiful ones were rare. Even if there were, they might not be interested in Nie Zhengyi's family background. As time passed, the days passed. When he was 25 years old, he was still unmarried. How could he not be moved when he found out that there was going to be a performance by such a young man? However, the fact that he could become a centurion proved that he wasn't an ordinary soldier. He was a scheming person. When he heard Zhang Quan and Su Dei announce that they weren't allowed to leave the inn today, he didn't react strongly. Instead, he remained silent, giving people the impression that he was very supportive of this decision. You guys be careful. Watch those who are jumping around. I will deal with them when I return tonight. After receiving news from the city lord's mansion that the peace talks would continue today, Su Dei instructed his centurions before leaving the inn. Nie Zhengyi was one of them. The centurions naturally nodded in response to the Kiliarka's orders. After the 2 of them left, most of the centurions returned to their rooms to sleep. Only 2 centurions were left on duty. Coincidentally, Nie Zhengyi was one of them. Nie Zhengyi's heart felt like it was on fire. He didn't know why, but he wanted to see what the performance was all about. With this thought in mind, he began to rack his brain, wondering if he should find an opportunity to take a short break. However, when his gaze fell on the entrance of the inn, he realized that there was a squad leader leading a group of 10 people guarding the entrance. He immediately dismissed the idea of forcing his way out. It wasn't that Nie Zhengyi didn't have the courage to fight 1 against 10. On the contrary, these ordinary Baiming soldiers were nothing in his eyes. However, he had to consider that once he made a move, he would immediately alert the other centurions. If that happened, no matter how powerful he was, he would not be a match for dozens of centurions. If it were someone else, they might have given up on such an idea. Nie Zhengyi was different. Ever since he was a child, he had always been a righteous person. Once he decided on something, he would definitely do it. In the end, he came up with an idea. Besides, if Baiming gave the first city 1 tael of silver, then the army would have 1 tael of silver less. This was a matter of decreasing one's losses and increasing one's gains. No matter how much they did, it would never be too much. Zhang Quan naturally expressed a clear rejection of Yu Mian's request. In his words, most of the money from Baiming's imperial court was used to develop firearms and train the new army. Even the Datong city's military pay could not be truthfully spent. How could there be any money left to give to the first city? All in all, the first negotiation between the two sides was like a lion opening its mouth. At the same time, it was also testing the other party's bottom line. Relatively speaking, today's negotiation was much more pragmatic. Especially after knowing that the negotiation time was only 3 days, Zhang Quan put down his arrogance. He did not mention those impossible requests to stimulate the two sides. Instead, he put forward some practical requests and conditions for the two sides to be allies. The negotiation began to enter the normal track. When the attitude of both sides began to become gentle, suddenly, a soldier outside the door reported that 2 centurions from the Baiming army had come. They said that they had important matters to discuss with Zhang Quan and Su Dei. The negotiation had to be terminated because of this. Yang Mansion. The 4-man post at the door became an 8-man post. At the same time, the number of patrolling soldiers on the streets of the first city began to increase. Even the divisions and regiments that were training in the ice and snow outside the city also gathered and returned to the city. All kinds of signs indicated that something big must have happened in the city. Yang Chendong was in the warm study room. Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, was reporting the situation to him. Young master, I heard that 300 people escaped from the Baiming army. They suddenly disappeared. As soon as he received the news, Lord Yu increased the speed and strength of the patrols in the city. Our Yang Mansion has also made sufficient preparations. The troops that were training outside the city are also returning to the city. Director Feng of the Security Bureau is dispatching people to secretly search for them. After reporting all the information he knew in one breath, Beta Persei took a breath and then waited for Yang Chendong's instructions. 300 people escaped? What's going on? Yang Chendong's expression became serious at this moment. If this was Baiming's plan, these 300 people were likely to cause chaos in the city. Of course, it was only 300 people. In a city with a population of more than 50,000 people and an army of more than 30,000 people, it was not a big deal. According to the security bureau in the inn, it was because many Baiming soldiers were very interested in the show performed by our publicity team. They wanted to watch the show, but the higher-ups did not allow it, so they escaped privately. Beta Persei scratched his head and said a reason that was not a reason. What? At this moment, even Yang Chendong was confused by these words. Just to watch a performance, 300 people had disappeared. This was indeed beyond his expectations, and it made him feel like it was child's play. Beta Persei also felt ridiculous when he first heard the news. But since it was reported by the Security Bureau and reported to the 6th young master, it should not be wrong. Who would dare to joke about such a big thing? This was a very serious problem. Yes, that's what was reported. Young master, what do you think? Beta Persei carefully asked Yang Chendong how to deal with it. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought for a while. After a while, Yang Chendong seemed to have made up his mind and said, Beta Persei, go and see where the publicity team is performing today. Find those people and arrest them all. Okay. Beta Persei became excited when he heard that there was a chance to make a move. By the way, young master, how many people can I bring? Take 10 guards with you, then ask Tiger Mang for a battalion of soldiers. That should be enough. Isn't it just 300 Baiming soldiers? By the way, don't make too much noise when you arrest them. Bring them back when you find them. Yang Chendong chuckled. He obviously had a general idea in his mind. Since Baiming himself had such a loophole, he would certainly take advantage of it. He wanted to know something from these soldiers. Beta Persei did not know the specific thoughts in Yang Chendong's mind, but since it was an order from the 6th young master, he just had to execute it to the letter. He nodded and agreed. After a while, he turned around and left the inner court. Chapter 762. Brother Beta Persei, what are you doing in such a hurry? Did something good happen? Seeing Beta Persei's anxious look, Ba Daojiang and Pang Yu, who were not on duty, saw it. The relationship between the two of them had always been good and they were always inseparable. Seeing the two of them, Beta Persei's eyes lit up. The sixth young master gave me a task and I'm going to complete it. How about this, both of you, and 8 brothers will come together. Fuyun Restaurant was one of the top 5 restaurants in the beginning city. It covered an area of more than 10,000 square meters and had more than 200 tables. In particular, there was a large open space in the middle of the restaurant with a cement floor. It was perfect for performing some large-scale programs. As early as a month ago, Fuyun Restaurant had contacted the publicity department and wanted to invite them to perform in the restaurant. Today was the official day. Since the morning, all the tables in the restaurant had been occupied. Even so, there were still many people who wanted to buy a place to stand with silver. For a moment, the restaurant owner was so happy that he could not close his mouth. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the staff of the publicity department who were ready at the back of the restaurant had already made all the preparations. As the director, Xue Qing kept walking in front of the girls of the publicity department, repeatedly telling them not to be nervous. When the performance started, they just had to perform according to the usual rehearsal. A group of very beautiful girls, each of them wearing the military uniform of the Cold Front, with beautiful berets on their heads, looked valiant and heroic. Today, they were going to perform the scene where the god of war commanded the army to defeat Agadorji of the Tartar tribe. Of course, they could not perform the entire scene. They only chose the moment when the entire army charged. In order to achieve a sufficient stage effect, Xue Qing mobilized a total of 220 girls of the publicity department. In other words, not only were all the 200 students recruited later on, but also some of the cultural backbone staff from Crimson City. This was to create a magnificent scene with many soldiers and generals. Since everyone had to go on stage, Kikich was naturally one of them. Not only did she have to go on stage, but she also had to appear as a character with status and lines. Kikich had a heavy responsibility on her shoulders. The reason why she was able to stand out so quickly was inseparable from her usual hard work, and naturally, it was inseparable from her current identity. As for Beta Persei, after he fell in love with Kikich, he told everything to the sixth young master. After getting his consent, he asked for advice on what to do. Perhaps in his eyes, the sixth young master was omnipotent. The answer given by Yang Chendong was simple. Chase after her. To put it bluntly, he had to be thick-skinned, show more concern, and interact more. After a round of pestering, his chances of success would increase by a lot. This was the reason why a good girl was afraid of a pestering man. Beta Persei naturally carried out Yang Chendong's orders to the letter. Whenever he had time, he would come to the publicity office. At the very beginning, it was under the pretext of inspecting work, but after a long time, even Xue Qing knew that this favorite of the sixth young master liked the little girl Kikich. Naturally, he gave the green light. When everyone knew about this matter, Kikich's identity and status also stood out. Even director Xue Qing was polite to her, because everyone knew how powerful Pillow Talk was. Fifth brother Yang had a high position and power in Crimson City, not to mention brother Beta Persei, who was in a higher position than him. With Xue Qing's care, coupled with her dancing foundation, her figure was very good, and her appearance was very decent. It was impossible for Kikich not to stand out. This time, she was entrusted with a heavy responsibility and arranged to play a very good role. This was not the first time Kikich had gone on stage. A week ago, she had performed for a while in the largest immortal abode restaurant in the first city, and her performance at that time was very good. But this did not prevent her from being nervous this time. Before going on stage, she was still constantly taking deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. The backstage was nervously and orderly preparing. The hall of the Fuyun building was even more crowded. Nie Zhangyi and the others, who were mixed in the crowd, were anxiously waiting. They rushed out of the inn, and then came to the Fuyun building at the fastest speed. At the door, they paid a certain amount of silver. It could be said that after taking out all the silver they had the opportunity to squeeze in. Speaking of which, he was lucky to have some silver on him. Compared to some of the other Beiming soldiers who had escaped, Most of them were blocked outside the restaurant because they did not have enough silver. If they were in the Datong prefecture, perhaps those soldiers would find ways to cause trouble to express their dissatisfaction. But when they saw the mercenary warriors standing in front of the Fuyun building, they did not have any thoughts of causing trouble. This was other people's territory, and they were facing the legendary elite mercenary warriors. They really did not have the courage to test the law. Finally, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and the performance began. On the 300-square-meter concrete stage, a loud horn sounded, and 60 to 70 warriors, with excellent figures rushed from the backstage to the performance platform. One flag after another was waved in their hands. Just this appearance alone attracted waves of cheers from the people below the stage. Perhaps it was because of the tall and straight figures of the female soldiers, or perhaps it was because the heroic spirit on their faces was not much inferior to the men, or perhaps it was because of their good looks, but they received a full house of applause as soon as they went on stage. Among the people who cheered were Zhengyi and some of his companions. Amidst the cheers, the female soldiers with lines began their performance. Through their mouths, they explained the matter of the Tatar army besieging the city with nearly 50,000 soldiers. Then they showed that the mercenary warriors were not afraid of difficulties, were not afraid of life and death, and were brave enough to fight. After all, it was a performance. Due to the influence of the venue and the surrounding environment, it was impossible to perfectly show every battle. It was just a description of some special battles. But even so, it still made the audience below the stage very excited. Cheers came one after another, and it didn't stop from the beginning. Fuyun restaurant was very lively. Outside the restaurant, Beta Persei arrived with 10 guards and a battalion of 400 soldiers from the independent regiment. Since Beta Persei was personally mobilizing the troops, Deputy Regiment Commander Xianxia naturally had to cooperate. He personally led a battalion of soldiers to express his sincerity. When they arrived outside the restaurant, they saw more than 200 soldiers wearing the Beiming army uniform outside the door. Arrest them all, kill those who resist. Beta Persei only glanced at them for a moment before issuing the military order. Immediately, the soldiers led by him rushed towards the Beiming soldiers who were still stretching their necks, trying to make a move in the restaurant. Before they could figure out what was going on, these soldiers had become prisoners. Some of the brave Beiming soldiers did not resist when they saw that the mercenary warriors were arresting them. They only shouted, "Why are you arresting us? We followed the Beiming messengers to your place. You can't treat us like this." Their reply was to gag them and then take them away on the street. They were all tied up and had black cloth gagged over their mouths. More than 200 people did not resist and quickly disappeared outside the restaurant. Beta Persei did not even look at these people. He only stared at the inside of Fuyun restaurant and asked the company commander in charge of the security of the propaganda department, "How many Beiming soldiers entered the restaurant?" "About 60 or 70 people. They are very easy to recognize. They are all wearing the Beiming uniform." The company commander stood at attention, saluted and replied respectfully, "Good, you guys guard outside. If you find any Beiming soldiers who have escaped, take them down immediately. If there is any resistance, you can take measures." Hearing that so many people had entered the restaurant, Beta Persei's eyes darkened, and a murderous aura emanated from his body. This time, there was geekage in the performance. Last night, she had someone send a message to him, hoping that he could come and watch her performance. Just from this point alone, the progress of their relationship was still very smooth. However, Beta Persei did not immediately agree. Following by Yang Chendong's side was a heavy responsibility, and he could not even grasp his own free time. But now, 60 or 70 Beiming soldiers were in the restaurant. If they had the intention of destroying this performance, wouldn't geekage be in danger? He thought that if someone really did that, he would not mind starting a massacre. I hope you guys are just watching a performance. If you have other ideas, you will definitely regret coming to this world. After making up his mind, Beta Persei called the deputy commander of the independent regiment, Xianxia. After discussing with him, they decided on a plan to enter the restaurant and capture the people. It's best not to make a move if you can. After all, there are still many people inside who are watching the show. Thinking that the sixth young master was very protective of the people under his rule, Yang Chendong reminded everyone to wait. At this time, inside the Fuyun restaurant, the performance had already lasted for more than an hour and was now coming to an end. They had broken the Tatar army's attack and defeated the enemy. Now was the time to cheer for the victory. The sun sets in the west, the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers are shooting, the camp is back, the camp is back. Comrades in arms are as close as brothers. Victory has summoned us together. You are from Tiannan, he is from Hebei. We are all brothers of the god of war. One after another, military songs that stirred the hearts of the people resounded on the stage. Under the chorus of the actresses, who were full of 5 tones, it brought climax after climax to the people present. The people who were encouraged by the performance clapped their hands until they were red, but the applause still continued. Jianghu was also mixed in the crowd. His eyes were shining, and his heart was filled with excitement. After watching this performance, Jianghu was deeply encouraged. Although time was limited, such a novel performance was the first time he had seen in his life. This kind of performance method was unheard of in the future. Even if the time was short, it still made him extremely excited and even deeply affected. Chapter 763. This was a real army. They were fearless in the face of a strong enemy and used all means on the battlefield. The soldiers were united and sincere. Only those who grew up in such an army could be called a real soldier. Only those who grew up in such an army could talk about great ideals. In comparison, the Beiming Datong prefecture he was in was far inferior. They only dared to attack when the enemy was few and far in between, as if they were afraid of angering the other party. When the enemy came in large numbers, they would turn around and flee without even fighting. They didn't have the slightest bit of courage to face difficulties. Anyone with ability and ideas could determine the strength of the enemy. At this moment, Jianghu's eyes were filled with envy. But when he thought about how he was a member of the Beiming army, and a centurion at that, the hot blood that had surged out of his body was forcefully suppressed. Sigh, this is just a dream. In the future, it's better to go back and be a centurion. Sighing like this, Jianghu slowly lowered his head. It was unknown whether he was lamenting his bad luck or lamenting that he was born at the wrong time. At this moment, a strong murderous aura suddenly attacked him. Jianghu, who had practiced martial arts since he was young and had a good physique, instinctively dodged to the left. A large hand slid down where he was standing just now. Thinking that it was close, he suddenly turned around and saw a soldier in a green military uniform standing behind him. At this moment, both sides looked at each other and saw each other clearly. The soldier from the independent regiment felt a burst of red in his face that his attack had failed. Seeing that most of his comrades had succeeded in one strike, reaching out to control the target he was staring at, but he had failed, this feeling made him very unhappy. Brat, I don't care who you are. If you surrender now, you can still live. If you resist, you'll be asking for trouble. Since the sneak attack had failed, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't hold back and directly put forward his own request. No matter what, Jianghu was still a centurion. How could he allow himself to be captured just because of one sentence? Although he had disobeyed a military order this time, it should be Chili Arch Su Dei who came forward to capture him. How could it be a mercenary army that made a move on him? I didn't cause any trouble. Why are you arresting me? He would not allow himself to be captured, but he also did not want to fight with the mercenaries. He knew how powerful they were, and the performance just now had given him a whole new understanding of them. It's not up to you to decide whether or not you committed a crime. Please come back with us. Sensing the unyielding aura emanating from Jianghu, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't choose to attack directly. Instead, he wanted to use words to make Jianghu surrender. That's impossible. I'm a centurion of Beiming. I can't go back with you. Jianghu shook his head. He didn't know what they meant. However, he knew that once he was caught, he would be a captive and would lose his freedom. This was not what he wanted. Then don't blame me. Seeing that Jianghu wasn't listening to them, the soldiers of the independent regiment could only shake their heads. They didn't care that there were still some commoners around them who didn't know what was going on and directly grabbed Jianghu. At this time, the performance was coming to an end. A group of female soldiers from the publicity department were lining up on the stage to take their curtain call. The audience below the stage was enthusiastically applauding, affirming the other party's wonderful performance this time. However, it was at this time that the sound of fighting came from below the stage, attracting everyone's attention for a moment. There were nearly 70 Beiming soldiers in the crowd watching the performance. About 60 of them were locked down and subdued at the first moment. After all, the Beiming army uniforms they were wearing were too eye-catching. However, there were still 9 people who were resisting, and they all had some strength. Among them, Nie Zhengyi's fight was the fiercest and the fastest to end. Bang! A fist collided with a fist, and the soldier from the independent regiment was knocked back 2 steps. Then, a long leg kicked him in the chest, causing him to stumble back again. If it weren't for the fact that there were still many commoners standing behind him, he would have fallen to the ground. After repelling the soldiers of the independent regiment, Nie Zhengyi instinctively wanted to escape. However, he quickly shook his head helplessly because he didn't know when, but he realized that there were already 4 mercenary soldiers standing beside him. They were staring at him covetously. Suddenly, the sound of fighting came from the crowd. Waves of screams could not be stopped from coming from the Fuyun building. Even on the stage, some of the female soldiers were trembling all over. It was one thing for them to fight and kill on the show, but it was another thing for them to fight in real life. Restlessness began to appear, but it was quickly suppressed. The commoners had already noticed that many mercenary soldiers had appeared on the scene. They were all tall and sturdy, and their eyes were fierce. The appearance of these people gave everyone a sense of relief. Some people were extremely excited. When they watched the performance just now, everything was rehearsed. How could it be as exciting as a real fight between dragons and tigers? Some of the bolder ones even found a good seat and sat down, as if this was the real show they were going to watch today. On the stage, Beta Persei appeared with 10 of his guards. As soon as he appeared, the publicity director Xue Qing hurriedly walked over. "Brother Beta Persei, what's going on?" "It's fine. It's just a small matter." Beta Persei's face revealed a confident expression. He first nodded at Xue Qing, then at Kikage, who was looking at him affectionately. Then he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Everyone pay attention. I'm Beta Persei from the Yang residence. This place has been controlled by the mercenaries. Everyone, don't panic, and there's no need to be crowded. This matter will be over soon. Everyone, just treat it as a free show." Beta Persei's voice was already loud to begin with, and this shout from his dantian was even louder. Sure enough, with this shout, the crowd quieted down a lot. Although most people didn't know Beta Persei, he said that he was from the Yang residence. Wasn't that someone by the God of War's side? Even the God of War had sent someone. What else did they have to worry about? After Beta Persei revealed his identity, the hot-tempered commoners quickly quieted down. Then, they all looked at the fighting scene with the mentality of watching a show. In the resistance of the 9 people, 4 of them were quickly subdued. Only 5 people, including Nie Zhengyi, were still fighting with the independent regiment. Nie Zhengyi was fighting 1 against 4 and was already at a disadvantage. With his ability, the soldiers of the independent regiment wouldn't be able to gain any advantage in a one-on-one fight, but it was hard to say if it was 1 against 4. He was having a hard time holding on and felt that the world was unfair. Seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, he thought of a plan and shouted, "What's wrong? Aren't the mercenaries very powerful? Why are you playing the trick of winning with numbers? Don't you dare to have a fair one-on-one fight with me?" Logically speaking, it was unreasonable to shout like that. On the battlefield, the most important thing was to kill and defeat the enemy. Who cared how many people you had? If you had fewer people, it only proved that you were not capable enough. But this wasn't a battlefield and there were so many commoners watching. Nie Zhengyi's shout attracted a lot of discussion and actually gained the support of some people. Deputy Commander Xian Honghai, who was commanding the soldiers, was startled when he heard this. He didn't think that there would be such a smart person among the Beiming soldiers who knew how to take advantage of the situation. He couldn't help but look at Nie Zhengyi and think about what to say. But before Xian Honghai could say anything, Beta Persei, who was standing on the performance stage, had already spoken. "On the battlefield, only life and death matters. No one will talk to me about fairness. But since you want a one-on-one fight, I'll fulfill your wish. Ba Daojiang, go test his ability. Be careful, don't kill him. This person has some ability and should be someone with a position." "Yes, brother Beta Persei." Hearing that there was a chance to show off his skills, Ba Daojiang immediately grinned and nodded excitedly. He took the task and strode towards the fighting field. With Beta Persei's shout, the 4 independent soldiers who were attacking at the same time stopped. Their faces were all red. They felt that it was a humiliation that they couldn't take down their opponent after such a long time. But since Brother Beta Persei had given the order, they had no choice but to obey. Beta Persei's shout attracted everyone's attention and they fell on Ba Daojiang, who was walking down the performance stage step by step. Ba Daojiang came from the underworld and his boxing skills were unparalleled. Later, he joined Xianxia and became a guard by the 6th young master's side. He even had the opportunity to receive guidance from Yang Chendong. His strength was no longer the same as before. Now that he had a chance to show off in front of everyone, he would definitely grab hold of this opportunity. First, he strode forward. His target seemed to be Nie Zhengyi. However, as he was walking, he happened to encounter a Beiming squad leader who was locked in a fight with an independent soldier. When he walked past, he suddenly threw a punch. Caught off guard, the Beiming squad leader blocked it with his own fist. However, it was precisely this attack that sent him flying. His body landed 3 to 4 meters behind him before he could land. His face was contorted in pain and a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that this punch had caused him serious internal injuries. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the independent soldier who was fighting with him stepped forward and subdued him. With just one punch, he had defeated a Beiming squad leader who had the ability to fight for a long time. This blow first caused the audience to fall silent. Then, there was a round of applause, expressing everyone's admiration for Ba Daojiang. Ba Daojiang cupped his fists at the audience with a smile on his face. After that, he continued to move forward. Another Beiming squad leader was sent flying with a punch. This forced the other 2 Beiming soldiers who were still fighting to stop and let themselves be restrained. They had already seen how powerful Ba Daojiang was and knew that they were no match for him. There was no point in asking for trouble. Chapter 764. With that, Nie Zhengyi was the only one left standing on the stage. However, his expression was extremely solemn. It was obvious that he had seen through Ba Daojiang's strength. In just a short while, Ba Daojiang had already appeared in front of Nie Zhengyi. He then asked in a disdainful tone, "Kid, do you want to take a punch or surrender? Let's fight. It's rare to meet an opponent like you." Facing Ba Daojiang's strong pressure, Nie Zhengyi did not choose to retreat. Instead, he moved one of his shoulders, showing that he would not surrender and would fight to the end. All right. Ba Daojiang was still afraid that his opponent would give in. If that happened, he would not be able to enjoy the fight. Now, Nie Zhengyi's choice was exactly what he wanted. Laughing loudly, he suddenly dashed to Nie Zhengyi's side and threw a punch. Nie Zhengyi, who had been observing Ba Daojiang's movements, quickly dodged to the side when he saw the punch coming towards his right shoulder. At the same time, he kicked out with his long leg. Having seen Ba Daojiang's moves, Nie Zhengyi would not be stupid enough to take his punch head-on. Boom! The kick landed on Ba Daojiang's waist, and the two separated immediately after the contact. In the first round, Nie Zhengyi gained the upper hand with a kick. On the other hand, Ba Daojiang missed his punch and even suffered a kick. It was obvious that he had lost points. Ba Daojiang, can you do it? The 6th young master has said more than once that even a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. If you are careless again, you should retreat. Beta Persei, who was on the stage, saw everything clearly. Nie Zhengyi did have some skills and his body was agile enough. However, the main reason he was kicked was because of his carelessness. Beta Persei's reprimand made Ba Daojiang's face turn red. Brother Beta Persei, give me one more chance. I will definitely take care of this kid. Ba Daojiang was determined, but at the same time, he raised his guard. He rushed forward again, his eyes fixed on Nie Zhengyi's body. At this moment, Nie Zhengyi's body tensed up. Although he seemed to have gained the upper hand in the first round, the rebounding force of his kick was not weak. He could still feel the numbness in his legs. This also proved the strength of the 8 Paths River. Right now the other party's heart was filled with caution, staring at him, giving Nie Zhengyi the feeling of being stared at by a fierce tiger. It was as if no matter what he did next, he would not be able to avoid the other party's attention, and would not be able to succeed. Nie Zhengyi was shocked by Ba Daojiang's aura, and he didn't dare to act rashly. Ba Daojiang didn't care about that. His body moved forward, and his fists rushed forward. His hands were like two dragons emerging from the sea, and it seemed as if he was only attacking and not defending. However, Nie Zhengyi could not be fooled by this illusion. Facing the Ba Daojiang that was prepared, if he chose to attack now, he would definitely suffer. After all, their strengths were not on the same line. There was still a huge gap between them. Tong tong tong. Nie Zhengyi didn't dare to attack again. Facing the two fists that were rushing towards him, he could only defend. Then the long fists smashed on his body. Every time they hit, he couldn't help but grimace in pain. It was really unbearable. After a dozen punches like this, when Nie Zhengyi felt that he couldn't lift his arms anymore, Ba Daojiang once again used a strong grappling hand. After pressing down on Nie Zhengyi's neck, he threw Nie Zhengyi out. Nie Zhengyi, who was already in a daze from the beating, tried his best to land on his back to reduce the pain he might suffer. Just as he landed and let out a muffled groan, another two soldiers from the independent regiment came over and held him down, completely subduing him. Take away all the troublemakers. Beta Persei, who was standing on the stage, waved his hand. Then, he nodded gently at the publicity director Shui Qing and gave Kikij a reassuring look. He then strode out of the Fuyun building surrounded by Pang Yu and the others. Not long after Beta Persei and the others left, Zhang Quan and Su Dei rushed over with dozens of Baiming soldiers. However, the answer they received was that Baiming soldiers were causing trouble here and had all been taken away. If they wanted to get them, they would have to go to the beginning city's barracks. Zhang Quan didn't dare to go to the beginning city's barracks. With just Su Dei and the dozens of people he brought, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between the enemy's teeth. Helpless, he thought of Yu Mian. At this moment, he could only ask for help from the city lord's mansion. Besides, the 300 Baiming soldiers were taken away in confusion. They were then taken to the mercenary barracks outside the South City. Here, they were detained separately and interrogated repeatedly. The general idea was that they left the Datong city's diplomatic mission without permission. Were they trying to pry into the secrets of the mercenaries and the city's defense, etc.? Faced with such a crime that could be beheaded, all the Baiming soldiers shook their heads like a rattle drum. They were really just curious about the show they were going to star in. That was why they had the courage to rush out of the inn. They really didn't have any other intentions. Putting aside how anxious and defensive the 300 Baiming soldiers were, Nie Zhengyi, who had been taught a lesson by Ba Daojiang, felt a little dizzy. Then, he was taken to a very quiet place with a black mask on his head. The reason why it was very quiet was because he could no longer hear any sound in his ears. After an unknown amount of time, he finally heard footsteps. Then, the black mask on his head was taken off. While feeling the dazzling sunlight in front of him, Nie Zhengyi also saw a very young man standing in front of him. The young man had a smile on his face and looked at him with interest. At the same time, he was also sizing up the person who had come. He was young, handsome, and had an indescribable temperament. It felt like he was as heavy as a mountain and as wide as the sea. Even though he was smiling, he still gave Nie Zhengyi a great deal of pressure. Who are you? When Nie Zhengyi saw that Beta Persei, who had previously commanded the troops, was standing beside the young man, and looked like a servant, his instincts told him that the young man in front of him was definitely not a simple person. Impudent! How dare you casually ask questions in front of the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty? Before the young man could answer, Beta Persei's roar had already sounded. Great Ming's Duke of Loyalty. Hearing this, Nie Zhengyi's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground with a plop. This was not to say that he did not have a backbone, but that Yang Chundong's name had already resounded throughout the Great Ming. Even in the Datong Prefecture's military camp, the soldiers often talked about this topic when they had nothing to do. In the hearts of the soldiers, this Duke of Loyalty had long been a legend and had become a synonym for strength and invincibility. You've heard of me? Seeing Nie Zhengyi kneeling in front of him, Yang Chundong's face did not change at all. Perhaps he had long been used to all of this. Yes, I've heard of the Duke of Loyalty and know that you're very good at fighting. As Nie Zhengyi answered, he was also a little excited. He could actually meet the Duke of Loyalty in person and even talk to him. This was something he had never dared to dream of before. At this moment, Xianxia was like a seventh-ranked county magistrate who had been summoned by the emperor. His heart was only filled with excitement and excitement. Hee, my level of fighting is just average. It's mainly because the soldiers under me put their lives on the line that I'm able to achieve glory time and time again. Yang Chendong said with a modest face. Xianxia did not seem to agree with this point of view. Perhaps it was because he had understood some things in the city yesterday, but he could not help but say, "That's also the ability of the Duke of Loyalty. Furthermore, you love your soldiers like your children. To be able to become your subordinate is a matter of happiness and pride. How could they not put their lives on the line?" These words, which seemed to be a bit of bootlicking, caused Yang Chendong to burst into laughter. "Yes, I know you. You're called Xianxia, right? I didn't expect you to be so good with words. In that case, if you were given a chance, would you want to join the mercenary army?" The Duke of Loyalty actually knew him and even took the initiative to recruit him. This honor immediately made Xianxia extremely excited. However, in his mind, he suddenly thought of his mother in the Datong prefecture. Although his father had died in the battle with the Walla a few years ago, and although he had not married a wife because of his pride, he still had a mother who lived in the Datong prefecture. If he joined the mercenary army now, what would his mother do? Once the Ming army and the embroidered uniform guards found out, his mother would most likely be doomed. Xianxia's expression constantly changed. Yang Chendong only sized him up and did not have any intention of urging him. After a few breaths of time, Xianxia raised his head and said very seriously, "Duke, although I really envy the treatment of the mercenary army and admire your courage in defeating the enemies of the grassland, I still cannot join the mercenary army." "Is it because of your mother?" Yang Chendong waited for Xianxia to finish speaking before asking with a smile. "You know this too?" Xianxia's face revealed a surprised expression. How could he have known that not long after they left Datong Prefecture, the intelligence personnel of the Security Bureau received the news? They reported the situation to the higher-ups of the Security Bureau and informed the First City. At the same time, they also began to investigate the entourage. And Xianxia was the main target of the research, so his situation was naturally investigated very clearly. Of course I know. I also know that you were born in the military, I know that you are very filial, and I also know that you have very high standards. This year, you are 25 years old and still haven't married. This is not because you can't afford to marry, but because you haven't met the right one. How about it? After watching the performance of our female soldiers today, they all have good figures and good looks. Is there anyone you like? Chapter 765. Yang Chendong smiled faintly as he spoke. Every time he said a word, Xianxia could not help but shiver. The Duke of Loyalty was really omniscient. He even knew the situation of a small centurion like Xianxia. Didn't that mean that the background of the 1,000-man diplomatic group had long been known? Xianxia was still in shock, but when he heard Yang Chendong's next words, he was so shocked that his mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. What if I told you that even if you joined the mercenary army, your mother would still be fine, and I would allow you to choose an unmarried female soldier as your wife? What would you choose? Is there such a good thing? Xianxia was indeed shocked and could not help but ask. Haha, I don't think I need to lie to you with my status. Yang Chendong did not answer directly, but this sentence was the answer. What was Yang Chendong's status? Even the Emperor of Baiming and the Emperor of Southern Ming were very afraid of him. Even the King of the Grassland, Yes Hen, would be frightened when he heard his name. How could such a person casually joke with a small centurion like Xianxia? As soon as he asked this question, Xianxia knew that he was overthinking. Since there was such a good thing, there was no reason for him to refuse. He immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Yang Chendong and said, "Your subordinate Xianxia is willing to join the mercenary group and serve the Duke for life." Haha, good. Xianxia finally made his choice. Yang Chendong was overjoyed and walked forward to help him up. Then he looked at him and said, "Not bad. Looking at your pure eyes, you must be a man of your words. Since that's the case, I will accept you." Xianxia was convinced by Yang Chendong, but he didn't stay in the beginning city. Instead, he was released along with the 300 Baiming soldiers and returned to the inn. In other words, Xianxia was loyal to Yang Chendong, but the nature of his work was different. He had become a chess piece buried in the Datong prefecture. Normally, he would pass on important military information, but at critical times, he could play a decisive role. Yang Qindong treated Xianxia quite well. He directly proposed that after returning to the Datong prefecture, there would be a specialized person in charge of his affairs. There would also be a specialized person who would contact him. This way, they could do their best to prevent his identity from being exposed and putting him in danger. At the same time, he also prepared a lot of money for Xianxia. Yang Qindong only had one request, and that was to bribe his superiors as soon as possible, and then continue to be promoted. The position of a mere centurion was still too light. What Yang Qindong wanted was a general who held real power and could come into contact with more secrets. Xianxia also guaranteed this. He did not doubt his own ability. He was still so young, and was already a centurion. This was enough to explain everything. If he had gold and silver to clear the way, he was very confident that he would be able to charge up in a short period of time and obtain a higher position. Zhang Quan went to the city lord's mansion, and not long after, Yu Mian personally went to the barracks to communicate. He took back the 300 captured Baiming soldiers. What Zhang Quan and Su Dei did not expect was that none of the 300 Baiming soldiers returned with injuries. In other words, they were only interrogated when they went to the mercenary barracks, and were not interrogated. On this point, Su Dei was very emotional. He felt that the mercenaries were indeed an army that followed the rules, and only this kind of army would be able to fight against the Mongol cavalry and win every battle. Humph! They are just ordinary soldiers. How could they be valued by the mercenaries? Zhang Quan had a different opinion. He felt that it was because the captured soldiers were too low level that they did not attract the interest of the mercenaries. This was the end of the farce. According to Xianxia's previous thoughts, neither Zhang Quan nor Su Dei punished the 300 soldiers, and only gave them a warning. It was very reasonable that the law could not punish the masses. After the farce, Zhang Quan and Su Dei went to the city lord's mansion again. They had wasted another day for nothing, and the negotiations still had to continue. In the Yang mansion, Yang Qindong was deep in thought with his eyes closed. Beta Persei stood at the side, not daring to say a word. Only when there was movement outside the door and Tiger's Mane's figure appeared did Beta Persei leave the house with light steps. What's going on? What happened? Tiger's Mane heard from the guards that the 6th young master did not even have dinner after returning from a trip. He hurriedly rushed over from the barracks. At this moment, he was naturally asking Beta Persei, who had been staying by the 6th young master's side. This is hard to say. Beta Persei shook his head, not knowing how to answer. What do you mean by hard to say? Just say what you have to say. Tiger's Mane glared at Beta Persei, as if he was questioning him. Tiger's Mane's loyalty to Yang Qindong was naturally unquestionable. If there was only one person in the army who did not betray Yang Qindong, it must be Tiger's Mane. Because of this, Beta Persei also trusted him very much. He immediately told him about how the 6th young master left the mansion and privately went to the barracks to meet Xianxia. Tiger's Mane, as soon as the young master appeared, Xianxia was subdued, but at the same time, he also said some things about the Datong mansion. According to him, the upper echelons of Baiming have been saying bad things about the young master in the army. They have always said that the young master is a traitor and have been on guard against him. And I heard that many soldiers in the Baiming army believe this. Beta Persei's answer finally made Tiger's Mane understand what had happened. Before he didn't know, so he wasn't worried. But now that he knew, he smiled and said, I thought it was something big. Don't worry, young master is very broad-minded. He definitely won't worry about such a small matter. Yes, the young master will not worry about such a small matter. But not long ago, the Security Bureau sent a report about the Baiming Imperial Court. I heard that many people there have put forward a proposal, saying that they want to order the new Urgan-Du Sea to cut off our supply route from the sea. What, they really dare? Hearing this, even Tiger's Mane's expression changed, and then he glared at Beta Persei. Why don't you say it all at once? You have to say it one by one, humph. After saying this, Tiger's Mane strode into the house. As soon as he entered the room, he came in front of Yang Qindong and said, Young master, don't worry, I'll immediately take the independent regiment to the new Urgan-Du Sea. Didn't they want to cut off our supply route? Then we'll flatten them first. Yang Chendong, who had been sitting on the chair with his eyes closed, opened his eyes at this moment. The independent regiment has such a strong combat power that they can destroy the entire Baiming army in the Nuergon Sea with their strength alone? They can also control every city and ensure the safety of our supply route? This. We can't do it. Even though Tiger's Mane was so confident, he could not help but say with a bitter face at this moment. The intelligence of the Security Bureau had long recorded that there were many Baiming guards in the Nuergon Sea area. Their military strength was about hundreds of thousands of people, and they were very widely distributed. The furthest two guards were thousands of miles apart. With such a large territory, how could an independent regiment occupy it so easily? Not to mention the independent regiment, even if the army in the beginning city was sent over now, they might be able to defeat the Baiming guards, but it was impossible to occupy that place and maintain the stability there. That place was too big, and there were too many guards. Unless they had enough military strength, they would not be able to control it. Not to mention, Yang Chendong was not ready to fall out with Baiming. According to him, whether it was Baiming or Southern Ming, they were all made up of Han people. In the future, if he wanted to lead the Han people to the top of the world, a strong population base was essential. Unless it was necessary. He did not want to make things difficult for the Han people, and he did not want to be enemies with the Han army. Otherwise, this was equivalent to digging his own foundation. In a situation where he did not want to fight, if the Baiming Imperial Court really ordered to block the supply route, Yang Chendong would really suffer. After all, the ability of the beginning city to self-produce was too low. If there was no continuous supply of resources from Xianxia city, not to mention developing on the grassland, even surviving would be a problem. Tiger's Mane did not speak, and Yang Chendong once again fell into silence. He now needed to think of a way to stop the Baiming Imperial Court from giving orders to the Nuergon Sea area. As for how to do this, it was truly a difficult matter. The negotiation was still going on in the city lord's mansion, and it was getting smoother. Perhaps it was because Zhang Quan's attitude was very firm, but in the end, Yu Mian still took a step back. He did not have the intention to ask the other party for military pay. Of course, Zhang Quan also did not mention that the beginning city would be under the management of the Baiming Imperial Court. In the end, the two sides reached an agreement, and that was to issue a joint statement to the outside world that the Datong Prefecture and the beginning city were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would unconditionally send troops to support. The agreement was finally reached. Presumably, after knowing this news, Yes Hen had to consider more things when he wanted to take action. This made Zhang Quan seem to be very satisfied. After completing his mission, he rejected Yu Mian's suggestion to stay in the first city for a few more days and left the city with 1,000 guards he had brought with him. After Yu Mian sent Zhang Quan off, he strode to the Yang Mansion to meet Yang Chendong. In the hall of the Yang Mansion, Yang Chendong looked at the joint statement made by the two sides and smiled. "It's just a piece of waste paper." Yang Chendong said this for a reason. The statement only said that the two sides were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would provide support. However, it did not specify how many reinforcements would be sent. In other words, if one side was really in trouble, the other side could send 10,000 people, 1,000 people, or even 100 people. With such a big loophole in front of him, Yang Chendong did not believe that Yu Mian and Zhang Quan would not be able to see it. However, both sides did not point it out. This already meant a lot. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.